Hello everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Whisper. Tonight we travel once more into the endless silence of Alaska, a land where radio waves drift for miles through frozen air. And sometimes, they return carrying voices that shouldn't exist. What you're about to hear is not a legend, nor a story told around a campfire. It is a verified account, drawn from official investigation reports, recovered recordings, and the personal logbook of a missing radio operator. From the small town of Nanana, a man whose final transmission blurred the line between frequency and afterlife. He wasn't searching for anything supernatural. He was simply listening until the static began calling him by name. As you listen tonight, ask yourself this: if you heard a familiar voice calling you from the static, would you answer? Every detail in this case has been documented and preserved, exactly as it appeared in the official files. And to this day, the same frequency still reappears at the same time every year. If you appreciate true, documented horror, stories grounded in real events that prove some mysteries are never silent, subscribe to Shadow Whisper and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next descent into real darkness. And we want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? A sound, a signal, or a voice that made you question what's really out there? Now settle in, turn down the lights, and listen carefully, because tonight we tune in to the radio that answered the dead. In the summer of 2022, residents of a small Alaskan village called Eagle's Rest began hearing something strange coming from the river that ran through their town. It wasn't the usual crack of shifting ice or the distant call of loons that filled the valley each evening. This sound was different, softer, rhythmic, unmistakably human. The first report came from Aaron Mills, a retired park ranger who had lived by the river for 40 years. He told a local news outlet that while fishing one morning, he heard what sounded like someone crying beneath the water. Not screaming, just a low, broken weeping that faded whenever he tried to move closer. When he cast his line again, the sound returned, rising and falling with the current like a voice carried through windpipes instead of water. The next day, 2 teenagers camping nearby recorded something similar on their phones, a garbled whisper that seemed to repeat their names. The clip went viral on social media under the title, "Alaska River Calls Your Name." At first, locals laughed it off, just another trick of running water and imagination. But within a week, the phenomenon spread. Dozens of residents began reporting voices along the riverbanks, sometimes familiar, sometimes foreign. One fisherman claimed he heard his dead wife humming the lullaby she used to sing to their daughter. Another woman swore the river whispered her brother's name 3 times, though he died in a boating accident upstream years earlier. The village council contacted Dr. Erica Vaughn, an environmental acoustics expert from the University of Fairbanks. Her team arrived on June 18th, setting up hydrophones along a 3-mile stretch of the stream. They expected to find turbulent current frequencies producing audio illusions, a known but rare phenomenon called flow resonance mimicry. What they found instead defied acoustic logic. The recording showed distinct harmonic bands, structured sound frequencies identical to human vocal resonance. Even more impossible was the pattern. Each night, between 2:13 and 2:19 a.m., the stream produced 6-second sequences of vowel sounds that matched human speech rhythms almost perfectly. Dr. Vaughn described the tones as organic, not mechanical. When filtered through spectrographic analysis, the waveform formed shapes nearly identical to a human larynx vibrating underwater. They thought it had to be a hoax, maybe submerged speakers or illegal sonar testing. But the valley had no signal towers, no equipment, and no underwater infrastructure of any kind. When divers checked the stream bed, They found only smooth stone, permafrost sand, and one anomaly. A fissure about 2 meters wide, venting a constant flow of warm water from deep beneath the ground. Temperature readings showed 48 degrees, several degrees higher than expected for a glacial tributary. That fissure was where the voices were loudest. When the team played the raw recordings back through surface speakers, villagers gathered to listen. At first it was just garbled tones and like words underwater. Then, at the 2-minute mark, the sound clarified. "You found us," it said. The phrase repeated 3 times. The voice was low, genderless, but carried breath and tremor, the hallmarks of true human speech. Half the crowd stepped back. The other half stayed, transfixed, listening to the current as it continued to murmur in broken syllables that seemed almost alive. Dr. Vaughn dismissed the first clear phrase as coincidence and a trick of rhythm and the human tendency to assign language to random sound. But when her team isolated the frequencies, the pattern matched not white noise but phonetic order. Consonants, vowels, pauses, all structured. By the second night, the sound grew stronger. Hydrophones recorded a second voice, higher pitched, overlapping the first. Both voices repeated a single word over and over, "below." Each repetition came with a pressure spike inside the fissure, as though the stream was inhaling. On June 20th, the team decided to send a submersible camera into the crevice. Visibility was poor, just murky silt and flashes of light reflecting off minerals. At 2 meters down, the camera hit a current so strong it nearly tore the tether line. At 4 meters, the light flickered. And then, just before signal loss, a shape moved across the lens. Pale, translucent, almost human. Not a fish. Not anything they could identify. Dr. Vaughn ordered an immediate halt to dives, citing safety concerns. But that night, the river began speaking names. At 2:17 a.m., every hydrophone along the stream picked up synchronized vocal patterns, repeating 8 distinct names. 6 were members of the research team. 2 belonged to residents who had drowned in the river years earlier. Dr. Vaughn's assistant, Liam Porter, later testified that when he heard his own name come through the headphones, the sound carried an unmistakable inflection, not robotic but intimate, as if someone familiar was whispering from beneath the ice. When he tried to cut the feed, the control board lights dimmed one by one until the recording stopped on its own. The next morning, the fissure had widened by nearly half a meter. Warm mist drifted above the water's surface despite the 40-degree air temperature, and along the banks, villagers found small stones stacked in pairs, one on each side of the stream, as though marking something buried between them. Dr. Vaughn wrote in her field journal that day, "If these are voices, they're not random. They're learning to speak back." By the 3rd week of the study, the sound was no longer limited to nighttime. Locals reported hearing faint whispering at dawn, a hushed chorus traveling the length of the river like breath through hollow glass. Sometimes it seemed to originate from the fissure itself. Other times it drifted downstream, following people as they walked the bank. The voices had changed too. Where once they'd only repeated fragmented syllables, now they spoke in full sentences, quiet, broken, but coherent. And always they addressed listeners by name. Dr. Vaughn's team increased security, fencing off the fissure and stationing guards to prevent curious residents from approaching. Despite their precautions, every night someone claimed to hear the river calling them. Children woke crying, insisting their parents were whispering to them from outside, even though both were asleep inside the same room. On June 24th, the phenomenon escalated. At 1:47 a.m., the hydrophones recorded synchronized speech across all stations, 37 seconds of continuous dialogue in 2 overlapping voices. The first was low and distorted, the same tone from earlier recordings. The second, higher and familiar, matched Liam Porter's voice exactly. "I can see you," it said. "You're standing above us." When playback was slowed, the background noise revealed an echo. Another voice repeating his words a fraction of a second behind him, like an underwater reflection. Liam swore he hadn't spoken near the microphone. He'd been asleep in his tent. The data proved him right. His voice print wasn't recorded through air. It came through the hydrophone cable, from beneath the water. That morning, the team found footprints in the mud near the fissure, barefoot, human-sized, leading from the stream into the tree line and stopping after 10 steps. Thermal imaging drones showed no animal heat nearby, no sign of intrusion. Yet something had left that trail between midnight and dawn, Dr. Vaughn wrote in her field notes. If this is mimicry, it's advancing. The cadence, the intonation, it's learned personal inflection. She sent samples to an acoustic linguistics lab in Seattle. The reply came back with one chilling note. The vocal resonance patterns are identical to recordings of the deceased subjects whose names the stream repeats. In other words, the river wasn't just producing sound, it was reconstructing voices of the dead. That night, Liam began showing signs of exhaustion. He reported vivid dreams of standing waist-deep in dark water, unable to move, listening to dozens of whispers around him. Each time he woke, he said his body felt damp, though his sleeping bag was dry. Dr. Vaughn ordered him to rest and restricted further field work, but Liam refused to leave the site. I can almost make out what they're asking for, he told her during a recorded log. It's not random noise. They want to come through. At 2:19 a.m. on June 25th, sensors registered another sharp pressure increase in the fissure. The current slowed, impossible for a glacial stream, and the water's surface went perfectly still. Cameras caught what looked like rising steam, but thermal readings showed it was cold. When the fog cleared, something new had surfaced, a smooth stone, perfectly spherical, resting at the fissure's edge. Liam retrieved it against orders. The rock was warm to the touch and hollow, emitting a faint vibration like distant humming. When placed on metal, the hum shifted pitch as if responding to sound around it. Liam described it as breathing in harmony. By morning, his tent was empty. His boots and jacket still beside his cot, the spherical stone gone. The team launched a frantic search along the riverbank, calling his name through megaphones. Each time they shouted, the stream answered back. Hydrophones recorded faint responses repeating his name, perfectly matching his tone. Liam, Liam, Liam. The voices multiplied, spreading from the fissure outward until the entire river hummed with overlapping echoes, 1,000 Liams whispering in unison. Divers were called in from Nome to search the fissure. They dropped a camera first, signal clear until it hit 7 meters. Beyond that, static and distortion. Then through the haze of silt, something shifted. A human silhouette, eyes open, drifting upward. When the divers froze the frame, they saw the figure's lips moving. Audio synced from the hydrophones captured the same voice repeating 3 words. Let us speak. The divers aborted immediately, terrified that the current seemed to pull toward them instead of away. When they surfaced, one of their wetsuits showed a handprint pressed into the rubber. 4 fingers, slender and elongated like roots. Dr. Vaughn ordered evacuation of the site. Before leaving, she sealed the fissure with sandbags and concrete, warning locals to avoid the stream. But even as the last equipment was packed, the voices returned. No longer isolated whispers, but a collective murmur rising from every ripple. The final recording ends with Dr. Vaughn whispering into her recorder, her voice trembling. It doesn't want to be covered. It wants to be heard. That night, pressure sensors spiked again. By dawn, the fissure had reopened. The stream flowed faster, carrying with it the same strange rhythm, 6 seconds of silence, then a single exhale, as if something beneath the water was learning to breathe through stone. By early July, the voices were no longer a local phenomenon. Audio anomalies began spreading downstream, carried into the larger tributaries that fed the Yukon River basin. Residents in towns 50 miles away reported hearing human murmurs rising from culverts and irrigation ditches. Fishermen swore they could feel vibrations through their rods, steady, rhythmic, like heartbeats pulsing through the line. The State Environmental Agency dispatched emergency hydrologists to investigate possible contamination. Their official theory was gas venting from decomposing organic matter, trapped beneath thawing permafrost. But Dr. Vaughn knew better. The acoustic profiles no longer resembled methane resonance. They had evolved into something structured, linguistic. Spectrograms showed clusters of phonetic bands arranged like sentences, each with measurable pauses. The pattern matched no known language but carried the cadence of one trying to form. She documented everything, voice trembling as she spoke into her recorder. They're speaking through the current. Every drop that passes over the fissure carries the same vibration. It's like the water has learned a single breath and keeps passing it along. The authorities ordered the research halted. The fissure was to be sealed again, this time permanently, using a damming system and reinforced concrete barriers. Construction crews arrived on July 8th. By noon, heavy machinery lined the bank, floodlights cutting through mist as the crew began redirecting the stream into a temporary channel. That evening, the first worker disappeared. His name was Eddie Monroe, a 27-year-old equipment operator from Anchorage. CCTV from the site showed him standing alone by the containment trench after his shift. At 10:46 p.m., he kneels beside the water as if listening. Then, in a movement too fluid to be natural, he slides forward and vanishes beneath the surface. No splash, no resistance. The current didn't even ripple. When divers searched the area at dawn, they found his hard hat lodged in the silt. The word, "listen," etched crudely into the plastic. It hadn't been there the day before. Dr. Vaughn tried to suspend the operation, but the state supervisors pressed on. The dam must be finished before thaw season, they said. She warned them, "You're not covering a fissure, you're covering a mouth." On the night of July 10th, the water began to rise. Pressure sensors along the temporary channel recorded surges every 11 minutes. The dam's foundation shuddered under stress that exceeded its load design. Then, just after midnight, all audio monitors activated simultaneously, emitting a deafening roar. Not of water, but of thousands of overlapping voices screaming in unison. Security footage captured the moment of the rupture. The concrete cracked, not outward, but inward, as if the river sucked it down. Within minutes, a wall of water surged back into the original streambed, tearing through the half-built structure. But witnesses swear the roar that followed wasn't the sound of flooding. It was breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Pause. Inhale again. The valley filled with mist, thick and silver, glowing faintly from within as if the water carried light. Hydrophones continued to record even after their casings were crushed by the current. The final 19-second clip captured a single phrase. Dozens of overlapping voices saying the same thing in perfect sync. "We are the echo of what you buried." Then silence. The flood receded within 24 hours. But when crews returned, the landscape had changed. The fissure was gone, replaced by a flat basin of still water about 30 meters wide, smooth as glass, perfectly circular. The locals began calling it Echo Lake. Scientists collected samples expecting sediment and debris from the flood. Instead, they found microscopic organic fibers, hair-thin filaments that pulsed faintly when exposed to sound. Under magnification, they resembled human vocal cords. Dr. Vaughn resigned from the project shortly afterward. Her final report, marked confidential, contained one paragraph redacted in later releases. "The river is not producing sound. It is transmitting memory. Every frequency matches biological resonance from human tissue. The voices are not from the living. They are impressions left by what the current absorbed." 2 months later, hikers discovered a camera embedded in mud a mile downstream. The footage, later verified by investigators, showed the aftermath of the dam collapse. Thick fog clings to the valley, Through it, faint silhouettes wade across the flooded plain. Dozens of figures, translucent, moving upstream against the current. Each one drips water in rhythmic patterns that, when analyzed, align with human breathing intervals. The figures don't look entirely human. Too tall, their limbs fluid, their heads tilted back as if listening to something above the surface. The camera shakes and one turns toward it. Its face is featureless except for a mouth, open wide, whispering underwater. The last frame freezes on a close-up, ripples forming around the figure's chest, expanding in concentric waves like vibrations from a drum. For one frame only, audio syncs with a clear sentence. The water remembers. Then the image distorts and fades to static. Today, Echo Lake remains officially off-limits. The water there is still mirror-smooth, yet it never freezes, not even in midwinter. Visitors claim to hear faint murmurs when standing near the edge, especially at night. Some say if you whisper your name, the lake will whisper it back softer, almost kindly, as though asking to be remembered. Dr. Vaughn moved south, retired quietly, and has refused interviews ever since. But in her last recorded email to the university before disappearing from public contact, she wrote one line: "Sound doesn't die in water. It waits." When Paul Whitaker inherited his father's hunting cabin outside Talkeetna, Alaska, he told friends he'd sell it before winter. He hadn't been back since childhood, not since the day his father vanished without explanation 25 years earlier. But when the realtor drove him up the old logging road that summer, Paul felt something shift inside him. The air smelled the same: pine, wet moss, and that faint iron scent the river carried after rain. It was as if time hadn't moved at all. The cabin stood at the edge of a clearing, half swallowed by birch and alder. Roof intact, chimney leaning. Paul stepped onto the porch and stopped. The front door, heavy cedar, hand-carved, was slightly open. Not weather damage. Not broken, just waiting. The realtor offered to go first, but Paul shook his head. He remembered his father's rule. If you open the door, you close it behind you, always. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and damp wood. Everything was exactly as it had been the day the search party stopped looking. Rifles on the rack, half-finished whittling project on the table, a mug still sitting by the window ledge. Dust had settled on every surface except one. The chair by the fireplace was clean, wiped, recently moved. "Must be squatters," the realtor muttered. But Paul noticed something else. The air near the chair was warm. The wood around it faintly warped, as though someone had sat there for years. He closed the door, and the sound echoed wrong, deeper than it should have been, like the cabin had exhaled. That night, Paul stayed in town at a roadside motel, trying to convince himself he was imagining things. But the dream started immediately. He saw the cabin interior from above, like a camera floating near the rafters. Someone was sitting in that same chair, back turned to the firelight. Each time Paul tried to step closer, the figure whispered without turning its head, "You came back too soon." When he woke, his hands smelled faintly of smoke. By morning, he'd made up his mind to return just once more, to gather his father's things before selling the property. The realtor refused to go again, claiming she'd heard voices in the woods on the way down. So Paul drove alone. The road was rougher than before, washed out in parts. By the time he reached the clearing, clouds had gathered. Thick, heavy, the kind that muffled sound. He noticed fresh footprints in the mud outside the porch. Not animal, bare feet. The prints circled the cabin twice, then vanished into the grass. Inside, the air felt warmer again. Not heated, alive. Dust swirled in the sunlight like breath. Paul moved through the cabin room by room, packing small things into boxes. Tools, books, his father's hunting knife. He found a locked drawer in the writing desk and forced it open with the blade. Inside were 3 cassette tapes labeled only by date. Nov 3, 1999, Nov 5, 1999, Nov 8, 1999, the week his father disappeared. He brought a tape recorder from the truck, set it on the table and pressed play. At first, only static. Then his father's voice, steady, measured, slightly nervous. The woods have been louder lately. The cabin hums at night. Not wind, not pipes. Feels like it's listening. Paul leaned closer. A faint vibration buzzed through the wooden floor beneath his boots, syncing perfectly with the voice on the tape. The next segment was recorded at night. Fire crackling, breath shallow. Woke up to knocking. Not on the door, and from underneath. Floorboards shifting like heartbeat. I think it's moving closer each night. Paul stopped the tape, heart pounding. Outside, wind pushed against the eaves, but he could have sworn he heard that same knocking echo faintly under his feet. He turned the tape off, packed the cassettes, and decided to leave before sunset. But as he reached for the door, it wouldn't open. The handle turned freely, but the door refused to budge, as if pressure held it shut from the outside. Then the fire crackled behind him, though he hadn't lit it. The hearth glowed faintly, coals stirring themselves in slow motion. And from the chair by the fireplace came a deep creak, wood bending under weight. Paul froze. The chair turned slightly toward him, though nothing sat in it. Smoke curled upward, forming a faint human outline. Shoulders, head, then a hollow chest. He backed away, but the cassette recorder clicked on by itself. The final tape began to play. His father's voice again, whispering fast, "It wants me to stay. Says the walls remember. Says the wood keeps your warmth when you leave. If you come back, don't sit down." The tape stopped mid-sentence. The cabin fell completely silent. Then came the whisper. Not from the recorder, not from outside, Omri, but from the wood itself. Deep and muffled, vibrating through the walls. "Sit down." Paul stood frozen in the doorway, one hand still on the latch. The voice that whispered "sit down" hadn't come from any speaker. It had come from inside the wood. Every wallboard seemed to hum with faint vibration, like a throat trying to form words. He backed away slowly. The chair by the fireplace was still turned slightly toward him, empty yet pressing into the floor as if someone heavier than air sat in it. The glow from the hearth dimmed, pulsed once, and steadied into a soft orange rhythm. In that light, the cabin seemed to breathe. Paul tried the back door. It too was sealed, the handle unmoving. He grabbed a window latch, locked tight. As he yanked, a soft click echoed through the room, followed by the sound of old wood stretching. The floor beneath him rose just enough for him to feel it under his boots. The house wasn't settling. It was adjusting. He shouted into the empty room, "Who's there?" His voice came back slower, quieter. "Who's there?" Not an echo, a reply. The same pitch, the same timbre. His own voice, delayed by 2 heartbeats. Paul froze, whispering now, "This isn't real." From somewhere above, the rafters creaked. The whisper answered, "Isn't real." Then silence. Only the soft hiss of the hearth remained. He searched for another exit, attic hatch, cellar trap, anywhere he could break through. His flashlight beam passed over the family photographs still hanging on the wall. The faces were dusty, faded, but in the photo nearest the fireplace, on a portrait of his father holding a rifle, the reflection in the glass showed something that wasn't there. The chair behind his father's shoulder in the picture was empty. But in the reflection, a figure sat in it. Dark, featureless, shaped like a person. Paul smashed the frame with his fist. The wood splintered, scattering glass. When he looked back up, every other frame on the wall had turned slightly sideways, as if unseen hands had nudged them all at once. Then came the knocking. Not from the door, not from outside, and from under the floor. 3 slow knocks, pause, 2 faster ones. Another pause. It repeated rhythmically, forming the same cadence as his father's breathing in those cassette tapes. Paul crouched, pressing his ear to the floorboards. Faint warmth radiated up through the wood, pulsing in steady intervals and almost like a heartbeat. When he whispered, "Dad?" the floor vibrated once in answer. Something shifted inside the wall. A crack, a scraping. Boards flexed outward for a moment as though inhaling. From within came a low murmur, words half formed by friction between beams. You left. You came back. Stay. Paul stumbled back, tripping over the recorder on the table. It switched on by itself. The reel spun and his father's voice filled the room once more. If you hear it talk, don't answer. It remembers names. He unplugged it, but the voice kept going, now echoing from behind him, from the walls, from everywhere. It remembers names. It remembers you. He dropped the recorder. The tape spilled across the floor like black ribbon, twisting on its own. In the firelight, the tape's shadow on the wall resembled a shape. Two figures sitting side by side in that empty chair. Paul ran to the bedroom and smashed open the small window above the cot. The glass cracked, but the frame wouldn't give. He used his shoulder, pushing hard, and then stopped. Outside, the clearing wasn't dark anymore. The air shimmered with faint orange light, pulsing in the same rhythm as the hearth inside. Every tree around the cabin leaned slightly inward, their trunks bending just enough to face the structure, their branches trembling like listening ears. Something inside the chimney moved. Ash rained down in soft gray flakes, and within the soot he saw handprints, dozens of them climbing upward as though something inside the flue had tried to crawl out. Then, the whisper again. But this time it was his father's voice, calm, close, speaking right behind him. The cabin keeps what it's given. You shouldn't have come back. Paul spun around. No one there. Only the fire, glowing higher now, almost alive, licking the air like breath. He grabbed the nearest box of belongings and hurled it through the window. It burst through the frame, shattering the glass. Cold air rushed in. For the first time all night, the humming stopped. Then from the silence came one final sound, a single creak, the chair turning fully toward him. He looked. Someone was sitting there. Not his father. Not exactly. The figure's face was featureless, formed from smoke and shadow, but it leaned forward, elbows on knees, the same way his father used to sit after long hunts. When it spoke, the voice came from inside Paul's head rather than through his ears. You brought the warmth back. Paul staggered toward the door. It finally opened on its own, slow and smooth like a gesture of invitation. He stepped outside and didn't look back. Behind him, the cabin door closed with a soft thud, sealing perfectly, no gaps, no sound escaping. The forest went still, and in that stillness, a faint vibration spread through the ground under his boots, the pulse of a heartbeat too large to belong to any living thing. When the first snow fell that year, the forest closed its roads. By December, Paul Whitaker was officially listed as missing, presumed lost in adverse weather. Only his pickup was ever found, half buried near the tree line, key still in the ignition, heater off, windshield perfectly clean. No footprints led away from it. In January 2025, a university search team petitioned for access to the property, hoping to study frost preservation in abandoned log structures. They arrived with thermal scanners, drones, and an Anchorage-based film crew hired to document rural decay. The cabin stood exactly as Paul had left it. Chimney intact, glass missing from one window, snow piled against the porch steps. But their equipment registered something impossible. The inside temperature was 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The surrounding forest measured 10 below. At first they suspected a residual heat leak from the stove, yet the stove was cold, its ash frozen solid. The warmth seemed to come from the walls themselves, radiating evenly like human skin. When they touched the cedar planks, condensation beaded instantly, as though the cabin exhaled against their palms. One technician joked, "It's got a heartbeat," and everyone laughed until the handheld thermometer on his wrist started pulsing in exact rhythm with the line of nails running across the wall. They began a 3D scan of the interior. Infrared cameras produced a composite image of the cabin's temperature distribution. At first it looked like random hotspots, Then, as the pixels aligned, the pattern took form. A faint silhouette seated beside the hearth, broad-shouldered, head bowed. Another outline stood near the door, facing it. The positions matched a father and son. When they tried to print the scan, the file corrupted halfway through. Its final readable frame displayed text from the file header rearranged into words. "The wood keeps what it is given." The crew left before nightfall. Only one, a sound engineer named Ellie Tran, stayed behind to collect ambient audio. She set her recorder on the porch rail, aimed toward the forest, and stepped back to listen through headphones. At first, she caught the usual background noise: wind through branches, distant creaking of ice. Then came a lower tone, rhythmic, soft, a breath drawn slowly through a hollow space. When she increased gain, faint whispers surfaced beneath it. "Don't sit down." She froze. The phrase repeated, quieter each time, until it blended with the sound of her own breathing in the headphones. Then the recorder clicked off by itself. She packed her gear and drove out that night, refusing to speak during the entire return trip. Her field log the next morning contained only 6 words. "It knew my name when I arrived." By spring thaw, the research permit was withdrawn. Officials cited unstable foundation and risk of collapse. A demolition order was approved but never executed. Contractors refused to approach after equipment repeatedly malfunctioned near the site. A backhoe operator swore his engine stalled whenever its headlights faced the cabin door, though diagnostics showed nothing wrong. Locals say the structure still stands, though the trees around it have stopped growing leaves on the side that faces the porch. Snow melts faster there too, even on days without sunlight. In August 2025, hikers reported a faint orange glow rising through the woods at dusk, visible only from a distance. Fire crews reached the clearing expecting a blaze but found the cabin intact, its windows fogged from the inside. The interior was warm again, 68 degrees on the dot. On the floor lay a thin layer of soot shaped like footprints leading from the door to the chair, then stopping. The chair itself had shifted slightly closer to the fire, and on the seat rested a small box of audio cassettes, newly stacked, labels blank except one, written in fresh ink, July 3rd, returned. The tapes were sent to Anchorage for analysis. 5 contained only ambient hum, steady, rhythmic, like breath. The 6th carried a single human voice, low and even. "Speaking for 12 seconds, I kept the fire lit. It was cold without you." Voice comparison confirmed a match. Paul Whitaker. No trace of him was ever recovered. The property remains sealed under forestry protection. Thermal drones flown over the site each winter still record a constant interior temperature of 68 degrees, unaffected by weather, season, or time. Satellite images show faint plumes of heat escaping through the roof at night, dispersing into the snow like slow breath. People who hike near the old logging road claim they can sometimes hear knocking far below the frost line. 3 slow, 2 fast, repeating. Those who've lingered say the sound syncs with their pulse until it's hard to tell which is which. One man swears he saw light flickering through the trees at dusk, like fire through fog. He said he stopped to listen and heard wood creak, the sound carrying down the valley like a sigh. When he turned away, a whisper followed him through the wind. "Don't close the door. If you stand there in midwinter, when the world is silent enough, you can feel warmth seeping up through the snow, gentle, steady, almost human. And somewhere beneath the frozen boards, the cabin breathes. Because in Alaska, some homes never grow cold. They just wait for someone to bring the warmth back." In the summer of 2024, a research team from the University of Anchorage traveled north to study permafrost melt patterns near Kigluake Mountain Range, a stretch of rock and ice west of Nome. Their goal was simple: to extract sediment cores and map the retreat of glacial soil. Instead, they uncovered something the ground was trying to keep. The expedition leader, Dr. Harold Keene, was a 54-year-old geologist known for his quiet discipline. With him were 4 assistants, 2 graduate students, a logistics engineer and an environmental videographer named Soren Clark, hired to document the project. The footage they captured would later become evidence, though no one ever officially labeled it that. Keen's field notes begin calmly enough. June 17th, first borehole stable. Soil unusually warm. June 18th, depth sensors reading small pressure fluctuations. Possible methane release. By June 20th, the language shifts. Core 4 cavity collapsed during extraction. Audible low-frequency resonance below 3 Hz, similar to respiration. They'd broken into an underground void. Initial mapping suggested the chamber was roughly 60 feet across and 20 feet deep. Thermal imaging showed a constant internal temperature of 37 degrees, warmer than the surrounding permafrost, yet perfectly steady. At first, they assumed a buried geothermal vent, but the air pressure readings rose and fell every 31 seconds, like a pulse. Soren filmed the first descent into the opening, a narrow shaft sloping into blackness, its edges lined with frost that glistened in rhythmic condensation. Each time someone exhaled, mist drifted upward, and then reversed direction, drawn back down as if inhaled. The team nicknamed it the breather. They lowered instruments, a barometer, thermometer, microphone. The barometer fluttered in sync with the sound, soft, steady, not quite wind. One of the grad students joked that they'd found Alaska's sleeping giant. No one laughed after the readings came back. The sound waveform wasn't random. It matched the cadence of a human resting breath. 2 days later, a thunderstorm rolled over the valley, cutting radio contact for 6 hours. When the weather cleared, the shaft's frost ring had widened by nearly a foot, as though something inside had shifted. Keen recorded his concern in the log. Subsurface instability. Structure seems to expand during pressure peaks. Caution required. That night, Soren left the camera running inside the tent to capture time-lapse footage of the fog. At 2:12 a.m., the lens fogged completely white for 11 seconds, then refocused on the dig site outside. In those 11 seconds, the camera's internal mic picked up a low vibrational tone, rising, pausing, then falling, exactly 3 times. When the sequence was enhanced in post-analysis, the waveform mirrored that of human size, slowed 400%. The next morning, the team returned to find their excavation ropes slack and the ground subtly rearranged. The borehole edges had rounded as though the soil had settled from within. Keen wrote, "Surface retraction consistent with vacuum effect. Air displacement feels organic." He wanted to halt the dig, but the funding supervisor, monitoring remotely, insisted on one more probe for methane testing. At 3:17 p.m., they lowered a new sensor rig. 5 feet down, resistance. 7 feet, the rope jerked. Then came a muffled thump from below, deep enough to vibrate the tripod legs. "Could be permafrost shifting," Soren said, though his voice on the recording sounds unconvinced. They reeled the rig back up. The bottom end of the probe, stainless steel, was bent inward, concave, like something had gripped it. The metal registered microscopic abrasions that later metallurgists described as consistent with pressure from a flexible surface, neither rock nor ice. That night, the temperature in the chamber rose 2 degrees. Keen noted, expansion continuous. Internal atmosphere oxygen rich. Sounds like wind, but cyclical. Cannot locate source. Locals from Nome who serviced the expedition's snow vehicles started refusing to stay past dusk. One mechanic said the valley gave him pressure sickness, his ears popping as if underwater. When he left, he told Keen's assistant to let it sleep, but curiosity outweighed caution. On June 23rd, Keen arranged a partial descent using a carbon fiber harness and tether. Soren filmed from the surface while Keen lowered himself 20 feet into the shaft, his headlamp beam cutting through suspended dust like underwater particles. "Smells like salt," he said into the radio. "And there's warmth." At 12 feet, the rope slackened. Dr. Keen confirmed depth, Soren called. Silence, then, "It's not a cave." "It's..." Static swallowed the rest. The line trembled once, twice, then went loose. Soren reeled it back frantically, pulling up harness, gloves, lamp, but no Keen. Only the headlamp returned, lens fogged from the inside, glowing faintly green. Audio from the camera caught one final sound as the other shouted into the hole, a slow, drawn-out exhale so low it rattled the mic casing, and beneath it for just 2 seconds something like a heartbeat. The radio call reporting Dr. Keen's disappearance reached the Nome station at 5:04 p.m. Weather still clear, wind negligible. By the time rescue teams arrived 12 hours later, the valley had changed shape. The borehole was gone. Where the shaft had been, the ground now bulged upward like the top of a buried balloon. Hard-packed soil curved in a smooth dome. No seam, no visible break. The tents stood intact, untouched, their zippers frozen shut from condensation that had risen overnight. Inside one tent, instruments ticked in perfect rhythm. Barometer, pressure gauge, and even the wind sensor, all cycling through identical rises and falls every 31 seconds, as if something below them was still breathing. The remaining crew, Soren Clark and 2 grad students, Dana Rhodes and Luis Perez, recorded everything on video. That footage, now archived under UAFGO 2024A, shows Soren crouched over the pressure gauge, whispering, "It's still exhaling. It's like it took him and started using his lungs." Dana tries to laugh, but her voice cracks. At the 30-minute mark, the camera picks up a low tremor that ripples through their boots. Dust shakes from the tent frame. Then the barometer needle drops sharply, followed by a soft inward hiss as if the earth just swallowed a mouthful of air. At 6:17 p.m., Luis shouts, "Frost has formed on the inside of the dome even though the temperature outside reads 41 degrees." The frost crystallizes in branching veins that meet at the dome's center, outlining what looks like ribs. When the team brushes it, a hollow vibration echoes beneath their feet. Soren's camera continues running while they retreat to the equipment sled. He repeats, "It's expanding." It's copying the rhythm. Then the video cuts to black. Later playback showed that during those final 20 seconds, the camera's microphone recorded sub-audio modulation at exactly 18 Hz, the same frequency range known to cause unease and visual hallucination in humans. Only this time the tone wasn't constant. It fluctuated in pulses that matched Dr. Keen's heart rate from his last recorded medical exam. 62 beats per minute. The rescue teams built a perimeter and began a controlled excavation. Every few feet the soil emitted a low creak, like leather stretching. At 9 feet a rush of warm air burst upward, carrying the smell of rust and seawater. In that instant all radios crackled with the same word, caught mid-sentence from an open frequency. Stop. No one transmitted it. They pulled the crew back and sealed the site. Overnight, seismic sensors registered rhythmic pulses extending 3 kilometers in every direction, traveling through bedrock rather than surface soil. One geophysicist described it as biological respiration scaled to geologic mass. Inside the temporary lab, Soren reviewed his footage frame by frame. At timestamp 002713, during the moment the dome first trembled, a faint outline appeared in the dust cloud, an imprint, roughly human-sized, pressing outward from beneath the ground, exhaling vapor through what looked like open hands. Then it faded. He turned the sound up and heard, buried in static, Dr. Keen's voice whispering one fragmented phrase. "It's hollow inside the stone." The university suspended the project within 48 hours. Equipment was flown out, samples locked away. The remaining team members were interviewed separately in Anchorage. Dana's transcript ends mid-sentence after she said she still heard pressure waves when I sleep. Luis withdrew from the graduate program and left Alaska entirely. Only Soren kept his footage and his silence. A month later, in August 2024, the Air Force Seismic Network detected a single event near the same coordinates, a pulse lasting 6.3 seconds with amplitude equivalent to a 3.4 magnitude quake. But the waveform wasn't sharp like an earthquake. It rose and fell in smooth rhythm, tapering like breath. Afterward, the valley subsided by nearly a meter. When geologists returned by drone, the entire excavation field had sunk into a shallow depression ringed by concentric ridges, as though the earth had exhaled and never inhaled again. Soren's final log entry, recorded 6 weeks later from his apartment in Anchorage, reads, "The soil samples vibrate when it rains. I think it's memory, not movement. Something down there is still practicing the shape of lungs." He sent a copy of his video to the U.S. Geological Survey and deleted the original. Yet technicians later discovered the deleted sectors on his hard drive had been overwritten. Not with zeros, but with repeating binary strings translating to one word: breathe. By autumn, the Kigluwike Valley site was sealed under an official restriction order. The University of Anchorage quietly reassigned every remaining member of the team. No public statement ever mentioned the breather. The valley's coordinates were redacted in geological databases and replaced with the designation Zone 14X, unstable permafrost substrate. Satellite imagery over the area began returning algorithmic blur, the same kind used for decommissioned military zones. When journalists inquired, they were told the project had ended due to environmental risk and methane instability. But local hunters already had another name for the place: the lung field. In early October 2024, a maintenance drone servicing a nearby weather station picked up low-frequency oscillations echoing through bedrock. The sound wasn't seismic. It pulsed at 0.98 Hz, one cycle every 61 seconds. Each pulse came with a faint surface temperature spike of 0.4 degrees Celsius, localized entirely within the depression left by the dig. The technicians replayed the data in audio format. What came through their speakers was unmistakable: a single breath, slow, deep, deliberate. They ran the file through signal analysis. The waveform matched the rhythm of a human exhalation drawn out 4 times longer than normal. And layered beneath that exhale, almost inaudible, was a voice, 2 syllables stretched by echo distortion. Analysts wrote it phonetically as Harold. It was Dr. Keene's first name. 3 weeks later, the Geological Research Council in Juneau received an anonymous package. Inside were 2 items: a portable hard drive labeled Soren Archive and a folded note that read, "It's still moving." Authorities never traced the sender. The drive contained raw audio, environmental logs, and 1 short clip marked final footage. Timestamp: 2:14 a.m. August 12th, 6 weeks after the collapse. The clip begins with darkness and Soren's voice breathing heavily. He's standing at the valley rim, his flashlight trembling. The ground below is covered in a thin mist. He says softly, "You can hear it now without instruments." For 10 seconds, nothing. Then, from somewhere deep beneath comes a muffled thum. Not explosive, but rhythmic, like the beating of a buried drum. The fog ripples outward in concentric rings. Soren whispers, "It's learning how." Then the camera tilts downward. Through the fog, faint indentations rise and fall in unison. Thousands of small circular depressions expanding and contracting as one, like pores opening to breathe. Between them, soil stirs, releasing thin jets of vapor that merge into a single exhalation drifting up toward him. The lens overexposes white for 2 seconds before the file cuts off. Forensic analysts verified the clip's metadata and confirmed no edits. The mist's thermal reading spiked to 98.6 degrees at the frame where the vapor touched the camera, human body temperature. After that, the valley went silent again. The U.S. Geological Survey installed 3 monitoring stations around Zone 14X. Their sensors record microseismic events every few weeks, too soft to classify as quakes. Each event lasts between 5 and 7 seconds, repeating precisely every 24 hours at 03:17 p.m. The time Keene had lowered himself into the shaft. Environmental scientists believe the valley is now venting subglacial gases in a stable loop. But the recordings tell another story. When sped up 2,000 times, the waveform doesn't resemble natural resonance. It forms syllabic intervals, patterns that mimic speech cadence. Those who've listened to the amplified version describe it as someone breathing words. One technician resigned after a night shift, leaving a note that read, "The last breath I heard wasn't mine." By 2025, vegetation began to regrow around the site. Yet every autumn, frost lines the valley floor in a perfect circle 50 meters wide, white veins against dark soil. From the air, the pattern looks exactly like the cross-section of a lung. Soren Clark was never found. His apartment in Anchorage remained locked, lights still on when neighbors called police for a welfare check. Inside, investigators found only a laptop playing the same 12-second loop, a recording of wind over the dig site, punctuated by a faint rhythmic sound. When synchronized with Keene's old medical recordings, the rhythm matched his resting breath rate precisely. At the end of the loop, a short line of text appears on screen every time the audio resets. Breathing complete. The message isn't stored in any file on the laptop. It's generated by the player window itself, as if embedded somewhere inside the waveform. Even after the machine was disconnected from power, the monitor flickered once more and the word changed. Continue. Today, no one is allowed within 2 miles of Zone 14X. The last expedition drone to scan the area in 2026 captured something unexpected. Heat blooming from beneath the frozen soil in 2 distinct zones, pulsing back and forth like the exchange of lungs. Each pulse rises to the same rhythm: inhale, exhale, pause. Inhale again. No one knows if it's geological, mechanical, or something older than either, but locals say that if you stand near the valley on a still night, you can feel the ground shift under your boots, like the earth itself remembering how to breathe. And in the hush that follows, you can almost hear it whisper your name. For most people, the Northern Lights are a spectacle to be admired from a distance. For Maya Ellison, they were an obsession. At 31, she had already built a modest reputation as a travel photographer. Her work appeared in eco-magazines and adventure blogs. Still images of frozen rivers lit by ghost green skies, long exposures that made the heavens look like brushstrokes. Friends said she chased light the way other people chased fame. She once wrote, "If the world ever speaks, it will speak in color." In February 2025, she flew to Fairbanks for what she called Project Halo, a solo attempt to capture the aurora from the remotest inhabited place in Alaska. She planned to spend 2 weeks in Kobuk Valley, a stretch of tundra wedged between mountains and ice dunes where temperatures fall below 30 and the night lasts 18 hours. Her permit, gear receipts, and flight logs were later verified by the Park Service. Every movement was documented, every exposure time noted. The record of her disappearance is as complete as it is inexplicable. Maya chartered a bush plane from Bettles Airfield on the 9th of February. The pilot, Derek Chambers, remembered her calm precision. 3 cameras, 2 solar batteries, a tenth the color of bone. He dropped her near an old research shelter used in the 1970s to monitor ionospheric activity. Before taking off, he pointed north and said, "If the sky starts flickering low to the ground, pack up and radio me. That solar scattering means a storm's coming." She laughed and replied, "That's exactly what I'm here for." For 3 nights, she transmitted steady updates, wind speeds, temperature, shutter tests. Her final message, sent at 10:42 p.m. on February 12th, read, "Lights lower tonight. Feels like they're close enough to touch." Satellite weather at that hour confirmed an unusually intense geomagnetic surge above the region, the kind that turns compass needles lazy and makes power lines sing. When Derek returned on schedule 2 days later, he saw her camp before he landed. The tent stood upright, zip closed, lantern glowing faintly. Inside, he found her sleeping bag unrolled, boots lined neatly, camera tripod collapsed but lenses capped. Everything looked like a pause, not an ending. Only one item was missing: the main DSLR she'd nicknamed Kira. Search teams expanded within hours. Her footprints led half a mile north across the crusted snow, each step deliberate, parallel even. Then the pattern changed. The spacing widened, the depth shallowed, and the last 10 prints formed a perfect circle before stopping entirely. A snowdrift had settled over the circle's center. When rescuers brushed it aside, they found a patch of ice burned smooth, as though heat had licked it from beneath. No ashes, no debris. Just glassed snow glowing faintly green, visible even under daylight. The pilot reported the phenomenon to the Alaska Geophysical Institute, which dispatched a field technician. She carried a handheld magnetometer that began spiking whenever it passed over the ring. Within that radius, the instrument read fluctuations identical to those recorded during high-altitude auroral arcs. But this was ground level. Like the sky fell down for a second, she told investigators later. They searched the surrounding tundra for 5 days. Drones spotted no polar bear tracks, no sinkholes, nothing that could swallow a person whole. But on the 5th morning, a thermal camera caught a single warm anomaly, flickering 300 yards from camp. Teams rushed there expecting an animal. They found the camera half buried in silt, lens intact, battery drained. The memory card survived. Its final sequence contained 7 photographs, all taken within 60 seconds. The first showed faint aurora curtains stretched across the horizon. The second, brighter, light bending downward, not across. The third captured Maya's own shadow on the snow, elongated, arms raised as if shielding her eyes. The 4th and 5th frames blurred into green-white arcs that formed vertical pillars. The 6th showed darkness, and in the lower corner, a smear shaped like a human figure suspended mid-air. The 7th was pure white, the sensor overexposed by something brighter than the sun. Metadata, 10:44 p.m. Feb 12, 2025, 2 minutes after her last transmission. When the images were processed, one anomaly appeared in all 7, thin parallel bands evenly spaced, running diagonally across each frame, as if something invisible but solid was passing between her and the sky. Spectral analysis revealed the light contained frequencies below the visible range, wavelengths known to trigger electrophonic sounds, those rare occasions when people hear the aurora sing. Locals from Kobuk had another phrase. They called it the sky path, and they warned that if you ever saw the lights touch the ground, you should look away. Because what descends in silence sometimes calls your name before it takes its color back. The recovered camera was shipped to Anchorage under a sealed chain of custody. Forensic technicians treated it less like missing person evidence and more like a meteorite. Its metal casing registered a faint residual charge, harmless but measurable. The logbook recorded it simply: device warm to the touch despite sub-zero storage. When the files were copied, the first 6 photographs opened normally. The 7th, overexposed to pure white, crashed every program that tried to preview it. Even simple thumbnail software froze on that single frame, as though the image contained more data than it should. A digital analyst named Serena Holtz decided to extract it manually. She broke it into code fragments, viewing it line by line. Halfway through, she stopped scrolling and called her supervisor. The binary sequence contained audio packets, something cameras don't record unless manually enabled. Maya's model had no such feature. After reconstruction, the embedded waveform produced 16 seconds of faint sound. Spectrogram analysis showed a layered frequency spectrum, a stack of tones rising and falling with heartbeat rhythm. When converted into audible range, it resembled wind through hollow metal, punctuated by a low human breath. And beneath it, 3 syllables, whispered in a pattern too deliberate to be random. Phonetic approximation. Maya come. They replayed the clip dozens of times, each iteration identical. Investigators dismissed it as auditory pareidolia, but Holtz noticed something stranger. The sound's phase offset corresponded to the gaps between the parallel light bands seen in the earlier photos. The voice wasn't embedded over the image, it was woven into its visual frequency. She printed the spectrogram and pinned it to her cubicle wall. In the pattern of peaks and valleys, the topography looked eerily like a landscape. Hills, a valley, then a flat plain tapering into nothing. When overlaid on a satellite map of Kobuk Valley, it aligned exactly with the coordinates where Maya's footprints had formed a circle. Meanwhile, Derek the pilot couldn't shake the case. He'd flown that region for 20 years and never seen light behave that way. 2 weeks after recovery, he took a GoPro and made another run over the site. The magnetic compass drifted 10 degrees east the moment he crossed the valley. At 2:40 a.m., roughly the time of Maya's disappearance, his cockpit audio picked up faint static pulses. He described them later as a melody that didn't need sound. When he landed back at Bettles, the GoPro had shut off at the exact same timestamp. The search team's second expedition returned in March under near full moon. The ice ring where her tracks had stopped was gone, replaced by a depression in the snow shaped like a lens. Shallow center, raised rim, 20 feet across. Ground-penetrating radar showed nothing solid beneath, only compacted permafrost containing streaks of iron dust. Under UV light, the soil shimmered with microcrystals that reflected green and violet wavelengths. Scientists later determined they were fused silica, common in meteorite impacts, except there was no crater, no entry point. One geophysicist suggested the auroral storm might have triggered a rare plasma funnel, a downward burst of charged particles, but his own instruments betrayed him. Their memory logs showed temporal drift, as if their clocks had run 40 seconds slower inside the depression. Local observers kept offering their own explanations. An elder from Shungnak named Arlene Tuvak told reporters that people used to leave offerings when the lights came down to drink the snow. She said those who followed the glow didn't vanish, they crossed up and became part of the sky's memory. When investigators pressed her, she smiled and said, "You think light only shines one way?" By April, the Anchorage lab completed its final analysis of Maya's files. In frame 5, the one before total overexposure, they discovered a reflection of her face on the ice. At first glance, it was simple motion blur, but when color channels were separated, another outline appeared beside hers. A fainter silhouette facing her directly, features undefined but symmetrical. The separation distance between them matched exactly the vertical spacing of the auroral pillars. In other words, the light itself seemed to shape into a mirror image of her posture. Holtz ran the frame through exposure correction and noticed one detail everyone else missed. Maya's mouth was open, forming a word. The lip pattern matched the syllable Kira, the name of her camera. The reflection, however, formed the same shape half a second earlier. That night, Holtz emailed the team lead a short report titled Photonic Echo Hypothesis. It proposed that the aurora had briefly acted as a resonant medium, recording and reprojecting human biofrequency. A mirror, not of image, but of existence. The reply came back the next morning. Theory interesting. Not admissible. Close case. The file was archived under accidental exposure to solar phenomena, but Holtz kept one still frame on her monitor, a zoomed portion of the overexposed white image. When she adjusted contrast, faint bands appeared at the edges, pulsing in waveform rhythm. She overlaid the sound waveform once more just to compare. It aligned perfectly, and every few minutes, without touching her keyboard, the frame would flicker for less than a second, and the spectrogram line would shift upward, as though responding to a heartbeat that wasn't hers. By the next winter, Maya Ellison's story had faded from the headlines. The official report listed presumed fatal exposure following auroral storm. No remains, no confirmed cause. Just a name, a date, and a folder of images no publication would print. But in the far north, some stories don't end, they wait. On February 12, 2026, Almost a year to the hour after her last transmission, air traffic control at Bettles logged an unusual call from a cargo pilot flying over the Brooks Range. At 10:46 p.m., the pilot reported visual contact with a ground-level aurora column near Kobuk Valley, a vertical shaft of light rising straight from the tundra like a glass tower. He described it as not lightning, not reflection, more like the sky inverted. When controllers checked satellite weather, no geomagnetic activity was recorded. The sky above Alaska that night was magnetically silent. The pilot's onboard camera captured 30 seconds before the feed cut out. Frames show a swirl of green-white plasma hovering a few feet above the ground, narrowing into a helix. Inside the glow, faint, almost human in scale, a dark shape seems to walk forward and pause. Then the image distorts and the data file ends abruptly at 10:47 p.m. The aircraft's instruments rebooted on their own. Playback logs revealed a short burst of audio recorded between data packets. 3 pulses, identical to the rhythm in Maya's embedded spectrogram. When analyzed later, the frequency matched the natural beat rate of a human heart under mild exertion, 92 BPM. 2 days later, a researcher named Holtz, the same analyst who had examined Maya's photos, requested permission to visit the site. The area was already cordoned off by local rangers, who found a new depression in the snow roughly 20 feet across. This one differed from the previous circle. The snow inside wasn't melted but crystallized, forming a pattern of fine hexagonal scales. At the center lay a small object half embedded in ice. It was a camera battery, brand, model, and serial number matching the one missing from Maya's gear. Perfectly preserved. And inside its casing, sealed under translucent plastic, was a faint impression of a fingerprint. The print belonged to Maya. Holtz later wrote in her field notes, "Impossible continuity between organic and inorganic material." The fingerprint reads as residue, but the polymer casing is fused, no external pressure mark, as if the touch occurred during solidification. The discovery reignited speculation. Geophysicists proposed atmospheric resonance, magnetic mirages, even ball lightning powerful enough to leave afterimages. But no hypothesis accounted for the audio pulses repeating the exact time signature of Maya's heartbeat. When the National Weather Service replayed satellite data from that night, they found a brief auroral spike lasting 43 seconds, localized entirely within Kobuk Valley, the only place on Earth registering visible emission without corresponding solar activity. The color spectrum leaned toward violet, a range the human eye barely perceives. In folklore, violet light is the color of return. Residents of Shungnak and Ambler reported seeing the sky open downward. A teacher on night shift claimed the snow outside her window shimmered with faces, hundreds of them, faint, smiling, vanishing as the wind stirred. She later identified one from a news article, Maya Ellison. For weeks afterward, pilots flying over the region described static that tuned itself into patterns, slow rhythmic hums that resembled breathing. Audio engineers mapped the signal frequency and realized it pulsed in intervals of exactly 1 sidereal day, 23 hours, 56 minutes and 4 seconds, the rotation period of the Earth relative to the stars. The sound repeated as though anchored not to our time, but to the movement of the heavens. By March, the valley went quiet again. Holtz filed her last report summarizing in one sentence, "If light can remember shape, maybe it can remember the one who watched it." She resigned shortly after, citing recurrent visual disturbances. Co-workers said she often kept her office lights dim, claiming brightness made her peripheral vision flicker green. That spring, hikers found a new cairn at the valley's edge, a neat stack of stones topped by a single camera lens facing the horizon. No one admitted placing it. Under the right conditions, the glass catches twilight and scatters it into thin beams that ripple across the snow. Locals call them Maya's footsteps. Scientists say it's refracted light bouncing off ice dust. But the villagers tell another story. that on the coldest nights, when the aurora drifts low and quiet, you can hear a woman's voice carried in the wind, murmuring a single word again and again. Kira. The name she gave her camera, the machine that kept seeing long after she was gone. And if you stand there long enough, the glow changes color. Green to white, white to violet, until the snow itself seems to breathe, and for a moment, the sky opens not above you, but around you. The Alaska Range rises like a frozen wall between heaven and earth, a place where the wind howls loud enough to erase your own thoughts. That's where Noah Garrison decided to test his endurance. He was 36, a marathon coach from Boise, Idaho. Friends called him methodical, obsessive about time and distance. Every run logged, every heartbeat graphed. Noah believed the wilderness measured honesty. The stopwatch couldn't lie. In July 2024, he set himself a challenge. A solo 6-day traverse through Denali National Park, tracing a route few attempted outside guided teams. No sponsors, no partners, just him, a pack under 40 pounds and a satellite watch tracking every step. He'd trained for months. High-altitude climbs, ice water acclimation, navigation drills. He emailed his itinerary to his fiancée, Lena Walsh, promising daily text pings via satellite. His last message before takeoff was simple: "If I'm not back by Friday, I'm still running." He flew to Fairbanks, caught a ranger shuttle to Wonder Lake, and started north on the morning of July 9th. The first photos he uploaded showed a man at peace, sunlight slicing across glacier fields, clouds balanced like ships in the blue. He wrote, "Silence out here feels alive, like it's breathing with me." Rangers later confirmed he signed the backcountry register at 11:42 a.m. Neat handwriting, confident smile in the visitor log. His declared route curved toward the Toklat River Valley, then east into an unmarked corridor known for shifting creeks and magnetic interference that scrambles compasses. Day 1. Ordinary. Day 2. Routine check-in, camped under clear sky. Wolves howling. Beautiful. Day 3. No message. At first, Lena blamed weak reception. It wasn't unusual in Denali's interior, but when the silence stretched past 48 hours, she contacted park headquarters. Rangers initiated a standard welfare sweep, expected to find a hiker delayed by weather. Instead, they found something that made no sense at all. Noah's base camp lay precisely where he'd planned. Tent upright, food sealed, stove unused, water filter drying on a rock. His camera sat on a tripod, still recording. Inside were 12 short clips, each one panning the horizon, slow and deliberate, as if he was studying something moving just out of frame. In the final clip, shot at 2:17 a.m., the tundra glows silver under midnight light. Noah's voice whispers, "It's circling me now. I can hear it walking when I stop." Then silence. The camera kept rolling for another 2 minutes, catching only a faint vibration like distant thunder before the battery died. Search teams followed his boot prints for nearly half a mile beyond camp. The tracks were clear, heavy tread from standard-issue trail runners, leading down toward a stream and looping back uphill. Then abruptly they stopped, not faded, not blown away by wind. They simply ended in clean gravel, as if the next step had never landed. Investigators marked the site with orange flags and ran 3D scans. The last 2 footprints were deeper than the rest, indicating a sudden acceleration like a sprint starting from stillness. From that point onward, nothing. No drag marks, no sliding soil, no sign of collapse. One ranger muttered he just outran his own trail. Helicopters combed the valley for 5 days. Drones detected no heat signatures, no torn clothing, no animal remains. Even search dogs behaved oddly, circling once, then sitting down facing the mountains, whining softly. When specialists downloaded Noah's GPS watch, they discovered a final data burst that defied physics. At 2:19 a.m., His coordinates jumped 1 mile east in under 3 minutes across terrain nearly vertical. The watch then flatlined. Battery healthy but signal gone. Experts blamed satellite error, though the same satellites recorded perfectly normal readings for nearby aircraft. Forensics found no malfunction. By day 6, the official report listed him as missing, presumed dead. Unofficially, rangers admitted they didn't know what to write. One senior rescuer later told a journalist off record, "You can track moose through a blizzard out here. But Noah? He left like the ground just stopped remembering him." Back home, Lena refused to close his accounts. She kept his fitness app synced, hoping for one last GPS ping. 3 weeks later, she got it. Her phone vibrated at 4:07 a.m. An automatic upload labeled Run Data 2165. The map showed a perfect straight line, 8 miles long, starting from Noah's last known coordinates and ending somewhere beyond the recorded terrain database. The final timestamp read 2:17 a.m., July 9, 2025, exactly 1 year to the minute since his disappearance. The notification that woke Lena Walsh at 4:07 a.m. wasn't a message from Noah. It was his watch, the same unit the Rangers had labeled powered, non-transmitting in their report. The file claimed to be a routine training upload. Run data by 2165. Distance 8.02 miles. Time 00:17:12. Pace impossibly fast across broken tundra. Elevation. A sawtooth pattern that made no topographical sense, like sprinting across stair steps carved into a cliff. Lena forwarded the data to Denali headquarters, where an IT specialist compared the route against U.S. Geological Survey maps. The start point matched Noah's last confirmed coordinates near the Toklat drainage. The end point didn't match anything at all. It sat beyond the map's edge, past surveyed ridgelines where the glacier's skin rippled into blank white. The file's timestamp made it worse. 2:17 a.m. July 9, 2025. Exactly 1 year to the minute since Noah whispered on camera, "It's circling me now." Rangers reopened the file. They pulled the sealed evidence bag from storage, placed Noah's watch on a copper grounding plate, and confirmed the device still showed the same final flatline. Whatever uploaded that route, the tech said, didn't come through this watch. Yet the Fit app insisted it had. Search teams went back into the valley. The weather had switched from summer calm to unseasonable winds that turned grass into silver waves. Helicopters swept the slopes. Somewhere between the ridge lines and the glacier's mouth, the radio chatter degraded into static despite line-of-sight contact. A pilot noted needle drift on his instruments, compass wandering and then recentering as if the air itself was magnetic. Ground teams relocated to Noah's last camp. They recovered his field notes, laminated cards clipped inside his food bag. He'd written calorie counts, bearings, and a tight column of short phrases dated night 3. Heard pacing when I stopped. Wind died. River got louder. Footfalls in 2 places at once. Running felt like being pushed. A thermal drone, flown low over the gravel wash, picked up a grid of faint heat signatures that faded as the sun rose. Rectangles warmer than the ground by 2 degrees, aligned in alternating rows. To the ranger who'd served in Afghanistan, they looked eerily like sleeping pads arranged in formation. Noah, of course, had been alone. At Lena's insistence, the team brought in a signal analyst from Anchorage. She set up a portable spectrum analyzer near the camp and recorded peaks and dips across frequencies most hikers never think about. ULF bands that carry through rock, VLF bands that naval signals use. Between 2:10 and 2:25, and by the exact window when Noah's camera had captured that low vibration, her device registered a standing tone oscillating at subaudible levels. "Think earthquake," she told the chief, but stretched out and melodic. They found something else. A stone spiral 100 yards from the last footprints. Fist-sized rocks placed in a tightening coil, barely visible until the light hit it sideways. not cairnwork. Too low, too meticulous. Every fourth stone bore a smear of black, later identified as magnetite dust. Someone or something had built a compass that didn't point north. It pointed toward the glacier. 2 veteran rangers refused to cross the spiral. The chief did, more out of duty than desire, and felt the temperature drop as if he'd walked into shade. His breath ghosted in air warm enough to soften the snow patches. "I don't put that on paper," he said later. "I just turned around." Back at headquarters, a wildlife biologist reviewed camera traps from the previous month. Elk, foxes, a grizzly sow with cubs, and on the night Noah vanished, a series of frames that captured nothing. Not empty forest, overexposed sky, as if the lens had flared toward a light source outside the visible spectrum. 6 frames blown out at exactly 2:19 a.m. After that, the animals gave the area a clean berth for 2 weeks. Lena, combing his cloud backups for patterns, noticed a habit. Noah always filmed 3 30-second horizon sweeps before breaking camp east-northwest. On the final morning, he started with north, skipped east entirely, and pointed the lens at the ground. A 5-second pan across his own footprints. A whisper. "They look like they're waiting for me." Then the camera tilted toward his tent guy line and caught a micro-reflection. A quivering vertical smear, like heat above asphalt. Except it was cold. The dew on the line crystallized as the smear passed. The park brought in an Inupiat guide who'd worked rescues farther north. He listened to the recording of the subaudible tone and shook his head. In his grandfather's language, there was a term he said outsiders translated poorly. Places where the ground breathes different. He pointed to Noah's notes. Footfalls in 2 places at once, and said, "That's what the old men describe when the ice is listening." The official line had to remain scientific. The revised report cited disorientation, weather shift, nocturnal hypothermia, a panicked run toward impassable terrain. It did not mention the 8-mile straight line that appeared 1 year later, or that Lena's phone received 2 more phantom uploads over the next month, both at 2:17 a.m., both straight as surveyor's string, both extending the same line farther into blank map. The 3rd file ended with a dot instead of a line, like a finish marker. Distance totaled 2406 miles, a marathon all told. Completed in 3 annual slices, no human could run across that terrain in that time. On the day search operations officially ended, Lena returned to Noah's camp with a ranger escort. She asked to stand where the last 2 footprints ended. Wind combed the grasses into a sheen. The glacier groaned in the distance like a tired animal rolling its weight. She set Noah's shoes, cleaned and dried side by side over the last impressions. She didn't speak. She simply faced east where the straight line would go and waited. The wind died. For a moment the valley went taut and silent. Then the river seemed to pulse. 1 long breath and the ranger's radio chirped without transmitting. Lena's phone buzzed. A new file appeared. Run data NR21666 and 4 in duration. Distance 0.01 miles. Location, the exact spot where she stood. The file title bore a single auto-filled word from Noah's app history: finish. By autumn, Denali's backcountry had erased every physical trace of Noah Garrison. Snow sealed the gravel washes. The wind combed the ridges smooth again. The park's official file ended with 2 pages of theories. Exposure, fall, misadventure. Each more procedural than convincing. Unofficially, the rangers stopped camping anywhere near his last coordinates. They said the valley had gone strange. In late October 2025, a volunteer search pilot flying over the Toklat corridor noticed something new. A perfect straight scar through the frost. Thin as a ski trail but stretching for miles toward the glacier. The line matched the path in Noah's uploaded data exactly. It appeared overnight, visible only when sunlight hit at a certain angle and vanished after the next storm. Soil analysis later showed nothing disturbed. No tracks, no cut vegetation, just magnetized silt, as though the ground itself had remembered movement that never touched it. When investigators tried to overlay Noah's 3 yearly runs on a topographic model, the path aligned with no known route. But the distances between each finish point formed a triangle that pointed due east toward a section of glacier marked on maps only as unnamed sector 12E. Old prospecting notes from the 1950s mentioned lights there that wandered like lanterns, but the area had long been considered inaccessible. Lena received her final upload on July 9, 2026, again at 2:17 a.m. The file carried no coordinates, only a thumbnail photo auto-captured by the fitness app's camera integration. It showed a sheet of ice reflecting aurora light, and in the reflection a runner's silhouette mid-stride. Zoom analysis suggested the figure's proportions matched Noah's exactly. She turned the image over to authorities. They logged it, printed a copy for the archive, and filed it under user-generated artifact. But one technician kept a duplicate. He later told a journalist off record that the metadata contained a fourth timestamp, 2:17 a.m., July 9, 2027, embedded in the image's shadow layer, a date still a year in the future. After that, the transmission stopped. In the winters that followed, rangers began reporting odd rhythmic tremors localized only to that sector. Short bursts of vibration lasting 17 seconds, always on the 9th of July. Seismographs showed amplitude too small for earthquakes yet too patterned for chance. The pulses mapped the same 8-mile interval recorded on Noah's first file. They called it the runner's line. Visitors who hike the region today occasionally mention hearing footfalls pacing them just out of sync, as if someone were running alongside in slower time. A few claim their watches freeze at 2:17 a.m. no matter the date. Park officials attribute it to magnetic interference, though no other devices are affected. Lena eventually left Idaho and moved north to Anchorage, where she volunteers for search and rescue logistics. She refuses interviews but once sent a single email to the lead ranger. It contained coordinates, her own. At the bottom she wrote, "If he's still running, maybe the finish line keeps moving." Postscript: in 2028, a National Geographic drone team scanning Denali's glaciers captured high-resolution thermal images. On frame 143, a heat signature shaped like a human stride appears across the ice field. Barely warmer than the surroundings, yet continuous over half a mile. Each step measured exactly 6 feet apart, matching Noah Garrison's recorded pace. The sequence ends mid-air, as if the final stride never landed. When asked to comment, a retired ranger who'd served during the original search said quietly, "The wilderness doesn't lose people. It keeps them moving somewhere else." He looked toward the ridge beyond Toklat, where the wind runs in steady rhythm across the snow. Sometimes, when the valley is silent and the sun skims the peaks, you can see thin plumes of frost rising and falling like breath. And if you stand still long enough, you might swear they keep tempo with an unseen runner, tracing the same endless line into the horizon. Because in Alaska, even the ground remembers those who refuse to stop. And some footsteps once started never finish. Tonight, we begin with a story that still echoes through one of Alaska's quietest coastal villages. A place so small it barely appears on maps, and so isolated that the nearest hospital lies across 40 miles of open water. Locals call it Nunak, an old settlement tucked between jagged cliffs and dense temperate rainforest along the Inside Passage. It's a place where wind carries whispers through the spruce trees, and where outsiders rarely stay longer than the daylight allows. In August 2024, Evan and Claire Reddington, newlyweds from Portland, Oregon, chose this village as their final stop on a luxury cruise through Alaska's southern coast. They were both in their late 20s, Evan, a detail-oriented architect, Claire, an elementary school art teacher known for her love of folklore and photography. Friends described them as balanced opposites, his calm precision matched by her spontaneous wonder. They had married that June, promising each other a year of small adventures before settling into routine life. The cruise, Northern Horizon, was supposed to be one of those adventures. An 8-day voyage through fjords and islands that tourists called the last untouched corner of America. The Reddingtons spent the first few days exactly as any couple might, collecting postcards, watching humpback whales breach in the distance, and photographing glaciers glowing under the midnight sun. Passengers remembered them as polite and inseparable, Evan always holding the camera, Claire always finding something new to marvel at. On August 21st, the ship anchored off Nunak for a half-day cultural excursion led by local guides. Nunak's population hovered around 600, mostly of Tlingit descent, and the village had recently opened to limited tourism through supervised tours. The itinerary was simple: a short dance performance, a small craft market, and a guided walk to the historic totem grounds bordering the forest. Everything was ordinary, until Claire mentioned the singing. According to passengers who joined their tour group, Claire paused during the walk and asked their guide if there was a choir practicing nearby. The guide, a quiet middle-aged man named Raymond Say, reportedly froze. He told her firmly but respectfully that she must have been hearing the wind, but Claire shook her head. She said the voices were clear, familiar even, and that they were calling her name. Evan laughed it off at first, assuming she was teasing or caught in the village's mystical atmosphere. But witnesses later told investigators that Claire became visibly uneasy. She looked like someone recognizing a tune from childhood, one woman recalled. Her face went pale, but she kept listening like she was waiting for something. Raymond insisted the group continue. He later told authorities he recognized the location where Claire had stopped. It was near the old forest boundary the locals called the Echo Line. A place, he said, where you don't linger after sunset. At approximately 2:40 p.m., Claire told Evan she needed just a moment to find the source of the voices. He tried to stop her, reminding her of their schedule and the warning from the guide. But she was already walking toward the tree line, calm but strangely focused. Witnesses described her as moving with certainty as though she knew where to go. Evan followed her immediately. That was the last time anyone saw them together. By 4 p.m., when the group reassembled at the docks, the couple hadn't returned. Raymond radioed the cruise director, and within the hour a joint search was launched by village volunteers and ship crew. The forest terrain was brutal, steep, mossy, and choked with fog that rolled in from the bay. Despite the conditions, they expected to find the couple quickly. It was rare for anyone to wander far. The woods surrounded Nunak like a wall, with only one marked trail cutting through it. But when daylight began to fade, the search team grew uneasy. Even dogs brought from the nearest station refused to move deeper past a certain ridge, whining and pulling at their handlers. Elder villagers quietly warned the rescuers to turn back before nightfall, saying the forest beyond the ridge does not keep time the same way. They didn't listen. At least not until the fog thickened so suddenly that visibility dropped to near zero. One searcher later described the sensation. It wasn't just weather. The air changed. The forest felt aware. That night they found one thing, a small camera belonging to Claire, half buried in moss about half a mile from the main path. The lens was shattered, but the memory card was intact. Inside were 53 photos, mostly from the cruise, but the final 2 were different. The second to last showed Evan standing at the tree line, smiling, unaware. The last showed the forest itself under strange light, trees blurred in motion as if the camera had captured wind that wasn't there. And faintly, in the lower corner, a shadowy figure standing between the trees. The metadata timestamp read 2:43 p.m., the minute they vanished. By nightfall, the fog rolling in from Icy Strait had swallowed Nunak whole. Searchers said their flashlights bounced off the mist as if it were glass. Sound itself felt wrong, Every rustle seemed to echo back a second too late. Evan and Claire Reddington had now been missing for 6 hours. The ship's captain delayed departure indefinitely, while the Coast Guard and Alaska State Troopers were contacted by satellite. Within hours, half the village joined the search. Fishermen, school teachers, even teenagers carrying lanterns made from plastic jugs. The locals moved with quiet urgency, staying close to Raymond Say, the guide, who refused to speak above a whisper once they crossed the ridge. He kept repeating one phrase in Tlingit that few outsiders understood. They must not answer back. The search grid expanded through the night, marked by ribbons of yellow tape tied to tree branches. Temperatures dropped to the 30s and radio contact became unreliable. Just before midnight, the first helicopter from Juneau circled the coastline, its searchlight sweeping across a wilderness that seemed endless and motionless at the same time. At 2:11 a.m., one of the local volunteers, a fisherman named Dean Keller, reported seeing movement near the logging road east of town. A lone figure walked out of the fog, barefoot, hair soaked but clothes completely dry. It was Claire. Searchers rushed toward her, shouting her name. She turned her head slowly, expression blank as if the sound confused her. When they reached her, she asked a single question. "Where's Evan?" Her voice calm, not panicked. She didn't recognize the rescuers nor the village lights behind them. Medical staff from the ship brought her aboard immediately. She had no visible injuries, normal body temperature and clear vitals. But when shown her own wedding ring, she looked at it as though it belonged to someone else. Under questioning, Claire gave her name as Claire Harper, her maiden name, and her age as 24, though records showed she was 29. She said she lived in Portland with her parents, that she was unmarried, and that she had come to Alaska to photograph the singing trees. That last phrase stopped everyone. None of the investigators had told her about what she'd said earlier that day. When shown a picture of Evan, she grew visibly distressed. "I've seen him," she said quietly, "but not here." Over the following days, state troopers combed 40 square miles of dense forest using drones, dogs, and thermal cameras. They found no trace of Evan Reddington. The only evidence recovered was a torn scrap of his jacket fabric caught on a low branch 2 miles from the main trail. Meanwhile, doctors on board the cruise ship conducted full neurological and toxicology screenings on Claire. No signs of trauma, dehydration, or hallucinogens. MRI scans later performed in Anchorage showed no abnormalities. Yet her short-term memory stopped precisely at 2:30 p.m. August 21st, the moment she and Evan entered the woods. Everything after that was blank. Investigators noted a disturbing pattern. Whenever Claire was shown a map of the search area, she would trace 3 circles with her finger, intersecting loops forming a symbol that none of the interviewers recognized. When asked what it meant, she said, "That's where the voices cross." Local elders were called to interpret her drawings. One, Margaret Kootsnu, an 87-year-old historian, said the pattern resembled an ancient boundary marker known as the 3 breaths, a warning carved into old totems marking places where the air remembers. As officials debated psychological explanations, other villagers began reporting strange incidents. A logging crew claimed their chainsaws stopped working simultaneously at the edge of the search zone. 2 volunteers said they heard singing drifting through the trees at dawn, soft, distant, and in a language none of them spoke. Raymond Say refused to go back into the forest after the second day. He told the troopers, "That place doesn't keep what it takes. It trades." By the 5th day, search headquarters moved back to the cruise dock. Evan was declared missing, presumed dead, though no physical evidence supported either conclusion. The northern horizon left Nunak under a gray morning sky while Claire, still detached and polite, stared out over the fog-covered shoreline. Reporters who later interviewed her described her demeanor as half awake. She insisted she had never been married, yet she carried Evan's wedding band on a chain around her neck, something she claimed she found in a dream. Back in Portland, specialists tried hypnosis therapy. Under sedation, she spoke phrases in an extinct Tlingit dialect. Linguists translated them loosely as invocations meant for travelers crossing between worlds. The case file grew thicker, but the explanation thinner. Psychologists labeled her condition dissociative fugue triggered by trauma, though none could identify the trauma itself. To this day, every test confirms her story is genuine. To her. A month after her return, Claire sent an email to the lead investigator. It contained a single line and an attached photo recovered from her repaired camera. The message read, "I can still hear them when it rains." The photo showed the forest under overcast light. Between the trees, barely visible, were faint vertical streaks of light, almost like figures blurred in motion. And if you raised the brightness high enough, you could see that one of them stood apart from the rest, its outline roughly the height and build of Evan Reddington. 3 months after the disappearance, winter arrived early in the Panhandle. Snow buried Nunak's trails, and the case of Evan Reddington was moved from active search to open investigation. For locals, the forest behind the totem grounds became what it had always been, off limits after dark. State trooper files show the search log simply ends with one line scribbled in pen. Subject not located. Environment unstable. Further entry not advised. But that wasn't the end for Claire. She returned to Oregon in October 2024 under the care of her family and a neurologist assigned by the Coast Guard inquiry. Her life resumed in fragments. Morning coffee, small talk with neighbors, work leave extended indefinitely. Yet subtle irregularities followed her. Electronic devices in her house would cut out during rainstorms. She complained of hearing faint, harmonic tones in running water, showers, sinks, even gutters outside her window. The tones, she said, were the same melody that had drawn her into the forest. Specialists recorded several sessions, confirming that the frequency she imitated matched no known mechanical hum. They resembled overlapping human voices sustained on impossible intervals, tones between musical notes. A sound engineer who analyzed the files remarked, "It's like listening to language without consonants, voices that never stop to breathe." Meanwhile, in Alaska, winter thaw revealed something new. A hiker, photographing the same ridge where the Reddingtons vanished, discovered a cluster of carved stones half sunken in the mud. Each bore symbols nearly identical to the ones Claire had traced in interviews. The 3 intersecting circles. One stone displayed a faint engraving. 2 stick figures hand in hand, their outlines merging at the center. When investigators compared satellite images from the day of the disappearance, they noticed a strange discoloration in that same patch of forest. A perfect spiral of lighter soil roughly 40 feet across, visible only for 48 hours before snow covered it. Soil samples later revealed high magnetite content, as if the ground had been briefly exposed to an intense magnetic field. Despite these findings, the case file closed quietly in December 2025, under inconclusive natural disappearance. The cruise line reopened its inside passage route, but stopped marketing stops at Nunak. Tour brochures simply skipped the small village altogether. Locals, however, kept the story alive. They began referring to the woods as the Singing Forest, a name that drew curious travelers every summer. Those who camped too close sometimes returned, speaking of faint choruses drifting through fog at dusk, always beginning as their own names carried on the wind. In early 2026, Claire agreed to one final interview for a documentary on unexplained disappearances. The footage never aired in full, but transcripts from the production were later leaked. When asked what she remembered from that day, she paused for nearly a minute before answering, "It wasn't a song you hear with your ears. It was something that remembered me first." She then described a moment of standing in a clearing where light moved like water, and figures stood among the trees. Familiar silhouettes she couldn't name. She said one reached out a hand, and behind him she saw more people, walking, waiting. Her pulse spiked and she stopped speaking. The interview ended there. 2 weeks later, she disappeared again. Neighbors found her car parked near the Columbia River Gorge, keys still in the ignition. Inside was her camera, the same model lost in Alaska. On its memory card were exactly 3 photographs: a dense forest under heavy fog, a close-up of moss-covered bark carved with 3 circles, a blurred image of a man's profile turning toward the lens, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, as if mid-song. Forensic analysis confirmed the timestamp, August 21, 2025, the 1-year anniversary of her first disappearance. No trace of her was ever found. In Nunak, elders still warn travelers to keep their distance from the tree line, where the wind carries harmony instead of noise. They say it's not the forest calling to people, but the echoes of those who already answered. And when the tide is low and the air perfectly still, some claim you can hear 2 voices weaving together, a man and a woman, singing faintly from somewhere deep beyond the ridge. Their melody has no words, only the sound of reunion, repeating softly until the fog rolls in and the forest falls silent again,